So fascinating. I checked in here at the hotel, and they have my name at the top. It says Dyer, and then it says, "Open doors you never knew existed." Right on my name at the top of it. The doors of perception. There are things that are known, and there are things that are unknown, and in between are the doors. Ladies and gentlemen, there was my dear friend Stuart Wilde, at the end of his book, The Infinite Self, said this about his near-death experience, or what it was like. He said, once you've had even a glimpse of that God force, you are going to be extremely humble. As I said, I've looked up that near-death tube on a number of occasions. I've seen what the light looks like at the end of the tube, the God force. There are no human words to describe the magnificence of it. One is lost to explain it. It is utterly the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, and the greatest power that exists. A glimpse of that, and every stuck-up twerp on the planet would sit down and shut up. But even if you haven't had a near-death experience, you will be able to feel the God force in your heart as you begin to control the ego. You begin to appreciate how enormous the God force is, how much love is involved, and the authority that the God force has just through its indescribable magnificence. When I contacted Anita finally, who was living in Hong Kong at the time, and asked her to tell her story and write it, and I would see to it that it was published. She did, and she sent it to me. And I read it in one sitting, and I called her up in Hong Kong, and I said, it's not good enough. You have to do it over. And this time, as you do it over, I want you to write it from the perspective of being in the presence of that God force that I know you experienced and just touched on in what you've sent. And she did. And Dying to Be Me is now a classic. It has just been commissioned to do a film by a major Hollywood producer called Dying to Be Me. And I bring to the stage a woman I honor and am humbled to know and love so much. My dear friend, Anita Moorjani. You are so beautiful to me.
This is incredible. This is, no words can describe how I feel. I could never, ever have imagined that my life would turn out this way. And Wayne Dyer has been such a godsend in my life. Thank you, Wayne. I mean, who would have thought? If it wasn't for Wayne, I wouldn't be standing here on this stage today. I wouldn't be traveling the world speaking. I wouldn't have a best-selling book. And if the doctors were right, I wouldn't be alive right now. My last day of life should have been February the 2nd, 2006. On that day, I had gone into a coma because I had end-stage lymphoma. I had been dealing with lymphoma for 4 years, And I was diagnosed in 2002. And it started with a lump on my neck, but over a period of 4 years, it spread throughout my lymphatic system. It had metastasized, and by the end of 4 years, I had tumors, some of them the size of lemons, all around from the base of my skull, around my neck, under my arms, in my chest, all the way down to my abdomen. By that point in 2006, my lungs were constantly filled with fluid, so every time I would breathe, I would choke. I couldn't even lie flat, because if I lied flat, I would choke on my own fluid. I had open skin lesions where the toxins were oozing out of my body. My body stopped absorbing food. And those of you who have dealt with cancer patients at end stage, you know what this process is about. It was very, very painful and uncomfortable. When my body stopped absorbing food, I started to lose weight very rapidly. I went all the way down to about 84 pounds. I looked like a skeleton. My hair had fallen out in clumps because of cancer treatments, and my muscles completely deteriorated. It's still very difficult for me to put myself, or to bring myself back to where I was at that time, because it feels like a lifetime away. So my muscles had completely deteriorated because I was no longer absorbing food. So I couldn't walk. My mobility came in the form of a wheelchair. And even if I would sit in the wheelchair for a while, I had a lot of difficulty holding my head up. I was so weak that my head would just drop down like this, and it took a lot of energy just to keep my head up. I was constantly needing to rest. I had a low-grade fever all the time. I was being cared for at home because I hated hospitals. I found them so depressing. I felt hospitals made you even sicker. So I was being cared for at home by a full-time nurse. But on February the 2nd, 2006, in the morning, I didn't wake up. My husband, Danny, who's here with me, he became frantic and called my doctor. And my doctor immediately knew that these were my final stages, the final hours of my life. But he told my husband to rush me to the hospital right away. So I was rushed to the hospital, and the doctors took one look at me and told my husband that these were my final hours, and now my organs had shut down. My kidneys had already started to shut down. And the doctors told my husband, and my mother, who was also there with me, she'd been caring for me while I was sick. The doctors told my mother and my husband that I wouldn't be coming out of the coma, and I probably wouldn't even make it through the night. The doctors were frantically trying to put tubes and needles into my veins. And even though I was in a coma, my eyes were closed, I could actually see, hear, and feel everything they were saying and doing. I could hear one nurse saying that she couldn't get a vein because all my veins had retracted. And I could hear all the conversations they were having, but I could even see them. And I could see my family, my husband who was really distressed, my mother. But the other thing was, I noticed that the pain was gone and the discomfort was gone. And I felt incredible. For the first time in 4 years, I felt amazing. I felt incredibly light and free. And I was no longer having that trouble breathing. And I felt as though I was enveloped by a feeling that I describe as unconditional love, for want of a better way of describing it. There are no words to describe being in that state of consciousness. There are no words, but I'm going to attempt to bring as much clarity as I possibly can with limited use of language. So what I felt, the closest I can describe it, is to a feeling of love, but it was an unconditional love, where I didn't have to do anything to feel that I was worthy of it or that I deserved it. It felt like I was loved just because I existed. And it felt as though that love was just coming at me universally, not from a single being, but just as though it was coming from everyone and everything. It was just the most incredible and profound feeling of love that I had never felt in my physical life before. I then started to sense the presence of my father. My father had passed away 10 years prior to this experience of mine. When I was growing up, my father and I had a very turbulent relationship. My parents are Hindu. I grew up in Hong Kong, but I went to a British school, so I was exposed to multicultures. My parents were very devout Hindus. They were traditional. They wanted me to have an arranged marriage when I came out of school. I didn't want to have an arranged marriage. I wanted to go on to college. I wanted to travel the world. I wanted to work. I had all these ideas, which in my culture, women are not allowed to have such big ideas. So I used to argue with my father all the time because there was a lot of gender disparity in my culture. I would argue with him as to why my brother could do what he wanted and I couldn't. Eventually, I gave in and agreed to an arranged marriage. But 2 days before the wedding, I couldn't go through with it, so I ran away. And if you know anything about what Indian weddings are like, what I did was huge because everything was booked for a week-long wedding. The banquet, the food, the horses, everything. And this was in India. The wedding was going to take place in India. And I ran away, and news spread faster than the internet. And in those days, there was no internet. Throughout our Hindu community all over the world, everybody had heard about this woman that ran away from her wedding 2 days before the wedding. So my name was mud. I was completely ostracized in the community, and everybody told my parents that no Indian man would marry me. No parents will ever allow their son to marry me because of what I had done. So I had carried this guilt for doing that to my parents. And my father passed away before my wedding to Danny. And I had thought my father never had the opportunity to see me get married. And here I was now in this other realm, in death, aware that I was dying. And here was my father, his presence, his essence, right in front of me. I thought I would get judged, but there was no judgment. All I got from him was pure, unconditional love. All I got from him was empathy, compassion, and understanding. He knew everything I felt. And I understood that when we cross over, not only do we lose our bodies, but we also lose our gender, our culture, our beliefs, our values, our ego. All these are layers and layers which we accumulate, which are part of our physical existence. We don't need any of these layers in the other realm. But without all these layers, what is left? When we are without our ego, without our culture, without our value, without our beliefs, without our gender, what is left? You'd think it would be a reduced part of who you are, but in fact what I discovered was that it was something far, far greater. I was something much huger and much more incredible and much more magnificent than what I had ever imagined myself to be. And I was aware that my physical body was lying there on the hospital bed. And I was aware that my physical body was much smaller, so much smaller, and so much more insignificant than what I... While I was in that state, I also noticed that time was very different. We don't experience time without our bodies the way we do here in physical life. In that realm, it felt as though wherever I put my awareness, that's where I would be. It didn't matter what place or what time frame it was. So for example, my physical body was lying in bed in the hospital in Hong Kong. But in an instant, I became aware of my brother, who was in India, who was getting on a plane to try and reach me in Hong Kong. The minute I became aware of him, I was there with him. It was like I could feel his emotions. And I became aware that he was trying to get to Hong Kong and trying to get to me before I died. So I knew that I had to at least stay alive until he got there, because I knew he would be distraught if he arrived there and if I was already dead. I became aware of other lifetimes that I had with my brother. And no matter what I put my attention on, I would be there, because I became aware of a lifetime of my brother and I together, where he was actually younger than me in that lifetime, whereas in my current lifetime, he was older than me. But even being aware of the other lifetimes, they didn't feel like they were past lives, at least from that perspective. Viewing it was as clear as viewing my current life of me lying in the in the hospital bed. So it was like wherever I put my attention, no matter where in time it was, no matter where in space it was, I would be there right away. It was, if you imagine a huge tapestry, and if you imagine the tapestry is incredibly complex, and if you stand really close to this tapestry, let's say the tapestry fills the whole wall, the closer you get, the less you understand the whole tapestry. The further back you stand, you get a full view of the tapestry, and it becomes clear what the big picture is. That's what it felt like in that realm. It was like I had this incredible clarity of my life. I understood why I had the cancer. I understood why I was there lying in that hospital bed in that moment, in that time. It was as though I had awakened from this dream, and the clarity was just incredible. But if I looked close at the tapestry, It was like being able to see all the threads in the tapestry. And one of those threads was me. And one of those threads was my life. And it was like I could see where my life had gone in the past and where it was yet to go. I could see all the other threads it had touched from my past, which were the other lives, and other lives it was yet to touch if I came back into my body. I could also see what would happen if I didn't come back. And it was like being able to have this bird's eye view, or I like to call it God's eye view of my life. I also encountered the essence of my best friend, Soni, who had passed 2 years prior. She had died of cancer, and I had not been with her in her final few weeks because I had my own diagnosis to deal with. And so I had been very, very fearful of spending time with her because I was watching her deteriorate. And it made me really fearful of my own future and what lay ahead of me. So I had not gone to the hospital. And when I got the news from her sister that she had died, I was so distraught and felt so guilty for not having spent time with her because I knew she wanted me to. And here was her presence in the other realm. And again, all I felt from her and for her was pure, unconditional love, no judgment. In that realm, we don't communicate the same way that we do here. My communication with my father and my best friend was literally like our essences merging together, because there's nothing separating us. There's no physical body to keep us separate. In actuality, all of us in this room, we're all connected because we're actually much bigger than our physical bodies. But our physical bodies give us the illusion of being separate, and they keep us limited. But in that realm, I understood everything my father wanted me to know. I understood everything my best friend wanted me to know. Because it was like our essences merged and there was no room for miscommunication. Here in physical, we use our vocal cords, we have biology, and the reason we learn to communicate is to be understood. It's so that we can express how we feel. But most of us actually use our communication to disguise how we actually feel. In that realm, there's no room for miscommunicating or disguising. Everything is known. And so there's no judgment, because what is there to judge when you know everybody's intention? My father communicated to me that it was not my time, that I still had work to do, and that I needed to go back. But yet, even though he was telling me it was not my time, I felt I had a choice as to whether to come back or not. And I didn't want to come back because it was so beautiful on that side. It was just, I had never experienced so much love. But yet, my father wanted me to know that there were gifts waiting for me. And then I started to be able to actually perceive my future. I could actually see that if I chose to come back, that I would be speaking to hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people. But in that realm, I had no idea what I would be speaking to them about. I couldn't even imagine what I would be speaking to them about. I had never been a public speaker before, never done anything like that. But it felt like I had a purpose that was related to speaking. My father also communicated to me that my purpose was linked with my husband's purpose, Danny's purpose. And if I chose not to come back, that he would not be able to fulfill his purpose either. and that he would probably pass soon after. I was aware that my husband Danny was sitting right there by my physical body at the hospital bed, at the hospital, and he was holding my hand, and he was whispering, and he was willing me to come back. And of course I felt complete compassion and empathy for him, but in that realm, there's no urgency to come back because we know that we are connected. We know that we are going to be united again anyway, and time is not the same as here. You might meet your loved ones in what feels like 10, 20, 30, 40 years here, but it doesn't feel like that there at all. I realized that I would be with my family even if I crossed over. But in that moment, I also realized that now that I understood what I did, I needed to go back. I realized that now that I knew what I knew, my body would heal. I had not wanted to come back because I was suffering, my family was suffering, my mother, my husband, my brother, they were all suffering, taking care of me. But I now realized that now that I knew this truth, if I chose to go back into my physical body, my body would heal very, very quickly. And it was in that moment that I felt my father and my best friend telling me, now that you know the truth, go back and live your life fearlessly. And it was in that moment that I started to open my eyes and come out of the coma. And I had been in the coma only for about 36 hours. But it felt like I had been gone for a long, long time. And as I started to come out of the coma, I was really groggy. It was like I had one foot on each side, and I was really confused. I wasn't very coherent, and I saw my brother standing there, and Danny was right there, and he started smiling from ear to ear, and he said, "Welcome back." And my mother was there. And I just kept saying things that they couldn't understand. I said, "Dad was here. I saw Dad. He said I'm going to be okay." And so they were wondering if it was the drugs or what was going on with me. So they called the doctor. And the doctor came in, and he was the doctor that had only started treating me after I went into the coma. I had gone into the hospital, and he was the doctor on duty, and I had been choking, and he took fluid out of my lungs, but I was in a coma the whole time. But as soon as he walked in, I said, "Good afternoon, Dr. Chan." And he said, "How do you know my name?" And I said, "Aren't you the doctor that was treating me when I came into the hospital? And you took the fluid out of my lungs." And he said, "But you were in a coma. You couldn't possibly know that." And he looked really surprised. Then he told my family that even though I was coming out of the coma, that they had to be really cautious because I was still very, very weak and very, very sick. I was still not out of the critical stage yet. So when he left the room, I said to my husband, "Isn't he the doctor that said I won't even make it through the night?" And that's when Danny said, "But he didn't even say that in the room. He said that outside the room, about 40 feet down the hallway. How did you hear that?" And I said, "I don't know. I could see and hear. I heard him." And I repeated to my family verbatim the entire conversation that my husband Danny had with the doctor down the hallway and other conversations. And that's when they started to realize that something really had started to go on. Within 4 days, my tumors started to shrink. It shrunk by 70% in 4 days. And every day I was just getting stronger, and I wanted to sit up, and I wanted to start eating again. I was being kept nourished through a food tube. I told them to take out the food tube. But the one thing that everyone noticed was that I was euphoric. They couldn't explain that. I wanted to sit up, and I just kept saying, I'm going to be fine. And do you know we all have a purpose here? And Dad is here, and Dad's looking out for me. And I started saying all these things. And my family they were very emotional, and we were crying together and laughing together. And I was still in the intensive care unit, and this is only by day 2 or by day 3, I was saying, I want to listen to my music. I just feel so happy to be alive. And my husband even connected my little speakers because I couldn't wear the headphones, and I was listening to music like Dancing Queen. And eventually, by day 4, the nurses came in and said the other patients are complaining because do you realize you're in the intensive care unit? You're not supposed to be so happy. You're not supposed to be listening to Dancing Queen. And I felt like telling them, I wish the other patients knew that it's okay to die. It's amazing. So they transferred me to a regular room, and within 3 weeks, they couldn't find any trace of cancer, but they kept looking. Now I want to say, the doctors who treated me were beautiful. Doctors are wonderful people, and they care about their patients. But what happened with me, the doctors were very caring, but I kept telling them that you don't have to keep testing me, because I know I'm going to be fine. And they said, no, we have to keep testing you. And in 3 weeks, they could find no trace of cancer, and they still wanted to run some more tests. And the doctor actually came in to my hospital room and told my family, we have a problem. And my family said, what's the problem? And the doctor said, we cannot find the cancer. And my brother it was who said, so how is that a problem? And the doctor said, if we can't find the cancer, we don't know what drugs to give her. And my brother said, but you don't give her any drugs if you can't find the cancer. And he said, no, it's impossible for the cancer to be gone in 3 weeks. That just doesn't happen. We just have to keep looking for it until we find it. Anyway, at the end of 5 weeks, they couldn't find any trace of cancer in my body, and they let me go home. And even though I was very weak, I spent a few weeks just getting rehabilitated, but I was free to go home completely cancer-free. I want to explain a little bit about what I learned from the other realm. But words are so limiting. Words are really limiting. But it was like waking up into a whole other world. And imagine that you were born blind. Imagine you've been blind your entire life. And play along with me. Just close your eyes for a minute. Just close your eyes and keep your eyes closed. And what do you see? Nothing. Now imagine if that's all you could see your entire life. From the time you were born, that's all you could see. But you can hear my voice. You can feel the cool air of the air conditioning in this room. You can feel the clothes on your body. And when you eat, when you drink, you can taste food, but you can't see. Now imagine if somebody puts 2 cups in your hand, 2 paper cups. And these paper cups to you are identical in every way. But the person who puts them in your hand says, one of these is blue and one of these is red. And you're feeling the cups and you're licking the cup and you're tasting it, and There's no way that you can perceive there's a difference between these two cups. To you, they're identical in every way. Now imagine one day that you can see. Open your eyes and imagine that you can see. And imagine all of a sudden, everything makes sense. The colors, being able to see the colors and seeing the difference between the two cups. Imagine that you had felt your way when you walked through a room and you didn't understand the concept of perception as in distance or perspective. Now you understood that you could look at a room and you could guess the distance without having to actually walk across the room to physically experience the distance. Your whole world changes. It's a whole added dimension. But all of this, everything you can see, it's always existed around you. It's not like you've gone somewhere different. It's always existed around you, but you just weren't aware of it. In a way, that's what dying feels like. It's like I became aware of a whole other world that exists. In my book, I say that heaven is a state and not a place. It's not a physical place that we go to. It's becoming aware that we're no longer attached to our physical body, so we can be anywhere at any time in that instant moment. It's like a whole other dimension opens up. It's like suddenly being able to see when you've been blind your entire life. That's what it felt like. So, what was the biggest lesson that I learned that saved my life? What was it that I understood in that clarity? I understood that the most important lesson was to love myself. I understood that I had spent a lifetime beating myself up, making myself small. I had spent a lifetime being a people pleaser, living a life of fear, never loving myself, never valuing myself, always forsaking myself, always treating myself like a doormat. Up until that point that I was lying there in that hospital bed. And it was only when crossing over did I realize that actually all of us are incredible, magnificent beings, more powerful than we realize, more amazing than we can ever know. And I realized that I had denied that part of myself my whole life by never believing in myself, by always treating myself like a doormat, by always putting myself last. I realized in that realm that I am an expression of God. Each and every one of us, we are an expression of God. I realized that when I crossed over, that when I was not my physical body and not my gender, my culture, my beliefs, and so on, what was left? What was left was pure love. This pure essence was pure God, pure love. And once I realized that this is who I am, how can I not love myself? To not love myself means to deny that part of God that expresses itself through me. And that's when I realized the importance of loving myself. It's not selfish to love myself. Most of us are blocked from loving ourselves because we've been conditioned to believe it's selfish. How can we not when we know that we are a part of God expressing through us? And loving myself doesn't mean being high maintenance. I have people tell me that, oh, I must really love myself because I have my hair done, I go for massages, and so on. Now, you can do all those things. That's great. It doesn't matter. It's fine. But that's not what it means to love yourself. It goes a lot deeper than that. When I was lying in the hospital bed after I came out of the coma, after the euphoric state, about 7 or 8 days later, I still hadn't started walking around. A nurse came up to me and said, you have to start using your legs and building your strength. And she got me out of the bed and had me walk around the room. And I said to her, I want to go and look at the mirror in the bathroom because I haven't seen myself in a long time. So I went into the bathroom, she walked with me, and I looked at my image in the mirror, and I told her to leave me alone for a few minutes, because as I looked at my image in the mirror, the person I saw was not the person I remembered me to be. There was this person whose face was really skinny. My cheeks were completely sunk in. My eyes looked like they were popping out. My hair had gone. And I looked at myself and I just started to cry. Not out of vanity or anything, but more because I couldn't believe that I had allowed myself to get to that state. I felt I had done this to myself by spending a lifetime of not valuing who I was. I had spent a lifetime of beating myself up and making myself small. And in that moment, I actually reached out and touched the image of myself, of my face in the mirror. And I said to myself, I will never, ever forsake you again, ever. I will never let you down. No matter, even if you fail, even if no one else believes in you, I will always stand by you. I will always believe in me. And that's a commitment I made to myself. And that was the commitment thank you. Thank you. That was the commitment I believe saved my life. And I tell people, love yourself like your life depends on it, because it does. It really does. All our decisions and choices in life are driven by only two forces, fear and love. Those are really the only two forces. And I realized that every choice I had made in my life up to that point that I was lying in the hospital bed was made out of fear. The choices we make out of fear are like, for example, do we work because we are afraid of not having money? Or are we doing the work that we're doing because we're passionate about it? Do we marry the partner we do because we love that partner and we love ourselves and we know we deserve them? Or are we with them because we're afraid of being alone one day? These are the kinds of choices, we make out of fear or love. I realized that a lot of the big decisions I had made in my life had been driven by fear. And when I had been diagnosed with cancer, even prior to getting cancer, I had been extremely conscious about eating all the right foods and doing all the right things to avoid cancer. I had lived my life from a place of fear of cancer. I'd lived my life from a place of fear of being disliked. I had friends who I were with because I was afraid of being disliked by them, and so I would do everything to please them. I would eat the right foods because I was afraid of getting cancer. Now, I still eat healthy foods, but today I do it because I love my life. I'm passionate about my life. I love what I do. And I want to live long. So I do it from a place of passion. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I became even more obsessive about the cancer. I became obsessive about researching everything on the internet. So I tell people that if you do have a diagnosis of any kind, don't obsess about the illness. Don't obsess about the illness. In fact, focus on health instead. Look for ways to start living your life again. Everything actually exists simultaneously. In fact, one way I'd like to express this is I would like you to imagine, if you will, that we are inside this huge warehouse. So now imagine that it's pitch black and everybody has a flashlight like this, say, and you are left navigating through life with nothing but this little flashlight. So imagine if all you can see is what you can see with the beam of this flashlight. So if you flash it up there, all you can see is what's there. And if you flash it there, all you can see is what's here or there. And all you have to navigate your way through this dark warehouse is this little flashlight. Now imagine if one day the lights go on and you look around and you suddenly realize that all this time you have been in this huge warehouse and you had no idea because you couldn't see it except what you could see with your flashlight. And you see that there are rows and rows of shelves, and these shelves are lined up with all kinds of things. Some of these things are things you've seen before with your flashlight. A lot of these things are things that you've never seen before because your flashlight never shone on them. And suddenly you see that all of these things exist simultaneously. There are beautiful things, not so beautiful things. There are scary things, not so scary things. There are ugly things. There are colorful things. There are dull things. All these things exist simultaneously, lined up on all these shelves. The good, the bad, the ugly, all of them. But you were only able to see one thing at a time before with your flashlight. Now, even if the lights go back off and you're still back to one flashlight, you're aware that when your flashlight is shining on one thing, that's not the only thing that exists. There is so much more that exists, things that you can't even conceive. But just because you can't conceive them doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And just because all you can see is the one thing, it doesn't mean that's all that that's all that exists. It just means your flashlight hasn't shone on it yet. The flashlight is an analogy of your awareness. The life you experience right now is where your awareness is focused. But I'd just like to do this little exercise to bring this home to you. I want you to look around the room, look around and find everything in the room that is red and commit it to your memory. It could be anything. It could be people's clothes. It could be anything. And I'm going to test you on it, so I want you to commit it to memory. Just look around and commit it to your memory. Okay, now face the front. Everybody, no cheating. Face the front. Close your eyes. Now I want you to recollect everything in the room that's blue. Okay, now give yourself a few seconds and then open your eyes. Now look around. Look at how many things you missed that was blue. A lot. Do you notice how much blue there is? Did any of you notice the blue while you were focused on the red? That's what our awareness does. The blue can be right under your nose, but if you're not focused on it, you're not even going to see it. Your life, your experience of life is going to be what your flashlight is focused on. That's how we experience life. You notice how when you buy a new car, you suddenly notice everybody's driving, so many people driving the same car. They were always there, but they've only come into your awareness when your flashlight is shining on it. That's how our lives are. We live our lives with one flashlight, and we think that what our flashlight is focused on is reality. It isn't. There is so much more to reality. And I actually believe that one of the reasons why we are seeing so much cancer in the world today is because everybody's flashlight is focused on cancer. Think about it. All the ads you see on TV on getting earlier and earlier detection. Think about all the campaigns and all the billions of dollars we're spending on cancer awareness. Now imagine if we put that much attention, that much focus, that much money on health, wellness, and joy awareness instead. We would see a very different reality. So I like to keep things simple. What I've realized is that life is a gift. Everything in life is a gift. Even my cancer was a gift. Because if I didn't have it, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. I wouldn't be where I am today. So everything in life is a gift. So my motto is basically just don't take life